Good afternoon. This is the Steve Mazzacane podcast. We'll get going in just a second. To those watching us not live, we do this live, so we wait a few minutes where people can come on. I do know, I would say right about 80% of our audience, actually, if I looked at the numbers yesterday, I would say 90% of our audience does not watch it live. So if you want to comment, go ahead. If you have a question, go ahead. I'll answer what I can. But in general, this is just kind of a general discussion today and follow up a little bit on yesterday. We had some big news from Biden today on Russia and the war in the Ukraine, and we will talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about gas prices. You know, it's amazing how quickly false information or false assumptions are spread. The key to spreading false information is you base it at least a little bit on fact, right? So I've seen 20 posts today on social media that are saying, we only get 1% of our gas, of our oil from Russia. Why are prices so high? And as we've said on this podcast a million times, you can't understand politics if you don't understand economics, if you don't understand world economics and the impacts of the decisions that are made. It's completely normal that gas prices are going this high. And just as a reminder, even without Russia and Ukraine, gas prices were going to go higher now anyway. Not to 417, which is now the national average, but we had a complete shutdown of the economy. We had nobody doing anything. We had planes barely leaving. We had cruise ships not going. We had nobody traveling. Nobody went anywhere for Christmas. Nobody went for holidays. Nothing happened. Meetings were on like we're having now. Nothing was happening from a gas consumption standpoint. So gas, $20 a barrel. Back in 2020 at the shutdown because there was nobody to buy it. So it was only a matter of time as we start reopening, as more people start traveling. We look at the projections from airlines and projections from cruise sites, and we see this massive pent-up demand to travel and do things. So even without Russia, we were going to have a significant jump in gas prices. It was never going to stay $2. It was never going to stay $3. So this idea that wait a minute, why is this going up over 1%? First of all, it's going up because demand is skyrocketing. And we don't have to use oil as the example. We can use anything. We can use cookies. We can use cars. We can use any example we want. When more people want something, the price for it goes up. We learned that in second grade. We learned supply and demand, or maybe not in second grade, fourth grade, whatever it was, that if there's a finite amount of something, when people want it more or more people want it, the cost of that thing goes up. The Russia thing's happening at the worst possible time when gas prices were already going to go up, where demand was already going to be there. And now we said, okay, let's not buy Russian oil. It's not the 1% or 1.5% that the U.S. gets from them that's going to make the big deal. That's not why gas prices are skyrocketing. It's the fact that 10% of the world's oil comes from Russia. And you have all of the energy companies pulling out. You have the U.S. obviously no longer buying from them. Other countries are going to follow suit. And if they don't follow suit and say we're not going to buy from them, they'll reduce as much as they can from them. Overall, when you have 10% of a supply on the market gone or negatively impacted, the rest of the supply cost goes up. More people need something. There's less supply of it. This is simple math, and you're getting huge jumps. And we're likely not done because on top of Russia is all of the demand, the pent-up demand we've had for the last 2 years. And these are unprecedented situations. You know, to prop up the economy during COVID, the federal government purchased securities from or bonds from banks. You know, that they did something to keep the market propped up. They lowered interest rates. They kept buying and buying and buying to keep those interest rates at a certain rate. They do things to make sure the economy still runs a certain way. Oil is the same thing. We have reserves that we keep. Is America energy independent? To a large degree, yes. We have the gas, the oil, to keep us going. But we can't avoid buying gas from overseas. Part of all of these arrangements we talk about, these trade agreements with other countries, these deals that we make with other countries, are to buy some of their stuff. So we can't just walk away from the world economy. So many people say, let's be energy independent. That doesn't mean we're never going to buy foreign oil. That means we're not reliant on foreign oil. We're still buying it. Some of our oil we keep as our own reserves to make sure we have a safety net, but we're still going to buy from other countries because we've signed deals and agreements, economic deals, that they buy a certain from us, we buy a certain from them. And those are in place. So this idea that we can say, hey, we can get gas prices down, we can produce it all in America, we don't have to buy from anybody else, that's completely isolating ourselves from the world and negating many of the deals that we have with members of NATO and other economic deals we have in place. Understanding that is understanding the convergence of economics and politics. That the decisions made may seem obvious, but why aren't they made quicker? That's why. They have impacts. And this decision to cut off Russia, while political, possibly the right thing to do, is going to have impacts as well. And when you start telling the rest of the world, we'd rather you not buy from Russia, many of those smaller countries which rely on the U.S. are going to say, okay, we're not going to announce it, but we're going to hold off on buying from Russia if we can. And that means overall in the market, there's going to be a significant drop in overall supply. At the same time, you have other suppliers saying, well, we can increase our supply, increase our production, but why would we? If we suddenly have an uptick in price, why would Saudi Arabia, who controls so much of it, say, hey, you know what? Let's produce more so we can sell it cheaper. Makes no sense. So they're going to produce just enough to keep the price where it is. And all of these factors play a role in what you pay at the pump and what you pay for heating oil. And that's why, no, it's not as simple as 1% of America's oil comes from Russia. So why is our gas not only going up 1%? That doesn't make sense. That's not how economics works. By the way, if you haven't read a great article, I think on CNN Politics, it says U.S. spy chiefs say Putin is likely to escalate in Ukraine with no concern for civilian casualties. And this is a kind of an eye-opening article to read. The U.S. intelligence community believes that Russian President Vladimir Putin views the conflict in Ukraine as a war he cannot afford to lose, suggesting he is likely to escalate the conflict without any concern for the number of civilians killed, the U.S. top intelligence chiefs told Congress. Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines said at a congressional hearing Tuesday that U.S. intelligence assesses Putin is unlikely to be deterred by the setbacks the Russian military is facing in Ukraine, suggesting he is doubling down on his campaign to keep Ukraine from joining NATO. We may have a madman on the loose here. And more, it's going to be an interesting question on what does America do about a madman. In the past, we've waited too long to take action. When that madman has nuclear power, nuclear capabilities, what do? And this is an amazing chess game. Like Putin clearly thought he was going to go in, take over Ukraine before anything could happen significantly to his country. He was wrong. I think he thought, or the intelligence agency is telling us that he thought that he was not going to be impacted by the actions of the West. That's proven wrong. They've taken a ton of the money they had in reserves away. China isn't playing ball yet. That'll be interesting to see what happens down the road. But Russia's clearly being impacted. We announced today that, let me get this right, McDonald's, Starbucks, and Coca-Cola suspending business in Russia. Pepsi and Coca-Cola announced it. McDonald's, Starbucks, many other corporations have already announced they're pulling out of Russia. So many people may be afraid to speak in Russia, but when you start taking away their livelihoods, all these McDonald's closed down, there's a lot of people working, a lot of jobs. Coca-Cola delivery guys, a lot of jobs. Starbucks people, a lot of jobs. People have no money coming in, and the Ukrainian people are fighting, and they're not just rolling over. How long does this take, and how long before America starts saying again, okay, we'll come back to Russia? I mean, if Starbucks pulled out now over this war, if McDonald's pulled out now over this war, you can imagine it's not going to be 5 minutes before they go back in. If this were to end next week or a month from now, are they going to go back the month after? I doubt it. America will still keep sanctions in place. It's not, all right, you won the war, it's over. Let's go back in history now. It's not going to happen. So these companies are going to suffer. They're going to lose part of their market share, obviously, but Russian people are going to suffer tremendously. And what it appears like most of them are not for this war. Remember, Russia has their own media, so they're hearing very biased stories here. It's just a fascinating thing we're seeing today. And I don't like using the word fascinating because lives are being lost, no question about that. But from a geopolitical standpoint, from an economic standpoint, this is where you should be sitting and reading the articles and studying and asking yourself, what action could we take? And then what are the actions and the reactions to that action? Because that's what political science is. And that's where, as historians, we want to look at and say, all right, if Biden announces this today, what's the next move? If gas prices are going up, how much are they going up? What percentage? And then if we want to go a step further, be a little crude about this, from a stock market investing standpoint, what companies are set to benefit? And I've been asking myself that question for the last couple of days. Okay, let's get off that topic. And I want to talk about something I didn't talk about yesterday. And I got a lot of questions yesterday when I announced that we're going to talk about the Brantford Board of Education. I wrote an op-ed 2 weeks ago or so, the day after the Brantford Board of Education announced that there was going to be essentially, the end result was there'd be no mask mandate. And to those who don't know the background, or if you do and didn't quite understand what was happening at the meeting, everybody and their mother was going to that meeting thinking a vote was going to be taken, including some members of the Board of Education. The Board of Education members were ready to vote, and they were all almost going to vote to end the mask mandate. This town had already dragged this out further than most of our neighboring towns. And we'll talk about that in a second. They go into the meeting, and we get to the agenda item on the mask mandate, and one of the members, I forgot who it was, immediately says, I make a motion that we end the mask mandate. And then the chair, Peter Bredun, said, hold on, we're going to talk about that at the end of the meeting. There's another item that they added to the end of the meeting. So now the audience to the meeting isn't just the people in the audience. Some other people were there for a sailing issue. Some were there for this issue. Most of the audience was online, and I was commenting back and forth and seeing some of their comments, and who were all wondering what the hell just happened. And many Board of Ed members were also wondering what the hell just happened. So we get to the end of the meeting, and they pass out wording on an ordinance or a new rule or what have you that basically says the superintendent has the right going forward to make adjustments to school as we see fit based on COVID demand or numbers or what have you. At no point do they explain that this wasn't in place before and therefore the mandate was over. At no point was that made clear to anybody and for like another 15, 20 minutes. And the point of the op-ed that I wrote was not that the outcome was wrong. The outcome of the meeting may very well be right. And there's a question on legal ability and legal responsibility. Did we have to have this thing in place? Does, if Hamlet doesn't have this responsibility written by the Board of Ed, does he have the responsibility at all? Does he have it by default? There's some questions that we can ask about that. But my question wasn't, was the end result good? In our last election, we talked, and I had every single Board of Ed member on, candidate for office, except for one, Neil Sullivan, who was not able to come on. He had an illness in his family. And the question in the discussion about all of these, and all of those interviews, was about the role of parents. And the answer was a pretty politically normal answer, that parents are stakeholders. We have to respect what they have to say. We have to respect them as part of the process. They need to be heard. And no one's going to have a disagreement with that. There are times that parents shouldn't be heard. There are times that only experts should be heard. But in this case, everybody running for office agreed that parents should be heard and respected. Their voice should be part of the process. If you're going to have parents as part of the process, and it's a new Board of Ed, it also means making the process as efficient as possible. It means respecting the fact that parents have lives and children to raise and jobs. And taking something that could last a quick press release and push it and become multiple meetings, a public hearing, another meeting where people are overwhelmingly confused is unbelievably disrespectful to who you refer to as a stakeholder. That the parents care, they're involved, but they're not involved every day. They don't go through this process every day. We had parents riled up. We had parents starting online groups. We had parents joining social media groups. We had parents starting rallies. We had parents showing at meetings who never show up at meetings on this issue. Other towns just put out a press release, no more mask mandate. What's interesting even more about Brantford is if they needed some sort of underlying guidance, like the explanation we now have is that because there was no specific policy in place before the state mandate, that when the state mandate ran out, there was no policy. It was done. And apparently the town's policy ran out last, I don't know, September, October or something. It would have taken all of 10 seconds to explain that at the start of this multi-week process. It would have taken nothing. It would have taken any member of the board, it would have taken Hamlin Hernandez, it would have taken anybody to get up and say, listen, I know everybody is worried right now about this mask mandate. Here's the deal. We don't have a mandate anymore. Once the state mandate is done, there's no town mandate in place. Therefore, there isn't one. And everybody would have got up and said, okay, thank you very much. Let's go home. And on March 1st, we don't have to wear a mask. My argument was not that the process, the end was wrong, but a process that doesn't respect parents, the so-called stakeholder, a process that is drawn out repeatedly is a bad process. So maybe members can get up and say this was transparent, but the average person didn't know what was going on. To anybody who watched that meeting, members of the Board of Ed didn't know what was going on. That's a hard argument to make that this process was transparent. I'm not saying the end result was bad. I'm not saying there were bad motives. I'm saying we have a new Board of Education that's been there after a fairly public race where parents really got involved last November. It's been in there for 4 or 5 months. Many of these members are going to be on there for 4 or 6 years. The time to address this is now. What processes are we using that actually respect the stakeholders? You know, academics have this tendency of doing the longest possible process in the world. We need more voices involved. We need to run this again. We got to peer review it 17 more times. We got to talk to more people. One of the reasons I liked during the interview process, there are a few members that have education and business experience because while education isn't really concerned about, getting things done on a time frame, business people are. Business people, the key word is efficiency. Are we making the right decision? Are we doing it efficiently? Is it in place? Is it handled efficiently? Do we spend the least amount of money to get the most results for that process? The least amount of time and expenditure to get the best results for that process. And that's why I like having business people on the Board of Education. Because a standard thing that has happened in Brantford for the last, as long as I've been covering news in Brantford, is that we have found the longest possible way to do pretty much everything. We are the last town to announce a snow day. No joke. Like every single snow day, you get it from Guilford, you get it from East Haven, you get it from North Brantford, you get a notice. What about Brantford? I'm getting messages. What about Brantford? I don't know yet. I have no idea why Hamlin Hernandez has to be the last person to ever announce a snow day. I don't know what difference it makes in the world. Other processes about energy efficiency for town buildings. The town had already done the process. The Board of Ed has to do their own. Why? For no reason. Our legislative officials talk about efficiencies in town and getting towns to work together and share public works facilities or share police departments or share dispatch centers. Every town, however, has their own Board of Ed with their own Board of Finance, their own human resources person, their own legal team, and the town has a separate one. And at some point, legislatures either have to say, this is crazy, or the Board of Ed itself can say, we're going to change the process. We're going to work more with the town. We're going to do things faster. Our stakeholders are going to be respected. We're not going to drag out things for no apparent reason. Another example being discussed right now are fields in town. And so we have a field issue at Walsh Intermediate School, the new school, that was left out of the initial plan because of reimbursement numbers with the state, and looked at being now. The town at the same time has created something of an ad hoc unofficial committee to look at townwide fields. What do we need as a town? No matter what the Board of Ed does, they don't have money to do fields. They have a say in it, no question, still on Board of Ed property, but in order for anything to get done, they have to go to the town. So the town has this group going, the Board of Ed has a group going, and it seems right now that never the two shall meet. If you're telling me parents are stakeholders, why do they have to go through the process twice? The town's going to start the process because they care about the whole town. It's up to the Board of Ed to say, hey, we want to be involved in that. We want to be involved in that process so that when we come forward and ask for money, we're not the odd man out and everybody knows what's going on. But consistently, the answer is this is our process. This is what we do. And my plea to this Board of Education is you're a new board. You get to decide a new process too. You don't have to keep doing things the way they were done before. You could reinvent the wheel a little bit here. There are members on this board who are business people, who think efficiently, who think about getting things done in the right manner. And if you're going to tell parents they're actual stakeholders, that they matter, that their time matters, that their opinion matters, you have to treat them with respect and not waste time for weeks and watch them mobilize and have to get their kids to come testify and post social media posts and start new pages on social media and start rallies. Meanwhile, you could have said, wait a minute, we don't have an underlying policy, so therefore, March 1st, you're done. Anybody could have done that. And all of our surrounding towns essentially did do that. They didn't have public hearings. They just put out a press release that said, March 1st, masks are optional. It is a common theme, especially in the Hamlin-Hernandez administration. It has happened over and over and over again. I know, I've been there. If this board does anything, it needs to stop and say, what were the processes in place, the things that were the norms for the last 8-10 years? And were they efficient? And should they be the norm going forward? And if you're going to look at parents and say you're a stakeholder, if you're going to look at parents and say we respect you, your time, and the things that you're saying and your input, then you have to mean it. And when you think about your processes, you have to think about them as an equal, if not more important, stakeholder. Those parents didn't want to be at that meeting. On a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night, they don't want to be sitting here in front of their computer instead of spending time with their kids watching a Board of Ed meeting. They don't want to have to post what the hell is going on at this meeting when Board of Ed members had no idea what was going on. The end result may have been perfect, but the job of this Board of Ed should be to find a better way to get there. And a better way will respect all the stakeholders, not just the administrator or the chair or those that chair meetings or other teachers or representatives or administrators. Parents have to be a key role in that. They have to think in terms of making it as easy as possible for them to have a voice and also respecting their time. So almost overwhelmingly, the people who stopped me on the street or stopped me at Hornet's Nest or when I was having breakfast or sent emails in said, thank you so much for that op-ed. You nailed it. But there were some people that said, you know, you were a little bit hard. I understand that. The hard wasn't on the outcome. You know, John Prinn said, I think other towns are going to copy us in this process. Other towns are not going to copy you in that process. That's nice to think. It's not going to happen. And other towns didn't have to have parents showing up for multiple meetings. They didn't have to prep their kids to give speeches on something that was never really an issue to begin with. Just nobody got up and said, by the way, there's no underlying policy that would allow us to mandate masks. And so I quoted Adam Sandler from The Wedding Singer. This is something we should have known about yesterday. There was no reason for this to be delayed. There was no reason. And then when you get to the meeting, and the thing all these people care about the most is the last item, isn't it easy just to get up and say, hey guys, just to let you know, X, here you go. You know, Guilford had, and he's not there now, but he had a chairman, Bill Bloss, who was an attorney, who was the chairman of the Board of Education, who was absolutely brilliant at this. He was a brilliant communicator. And he knew how to take complicated issues and make them simple for the public who is not at every meeting and not following the rules and the laws and know the ordinances. We need to get either a consultant in there or pick a member of the Board of Ed who is a very good communicator to take some topics and allow the people to know. And I try my best as a journalist, writer, whatever you want to call me, to convey some of these things. But somebody from the Board of Ed should also be that voice. And when they're deciding what goes in an agenda, when they're deciding what to have a public hearing for something, when they're deciding how long a process should take, we also have to stop and think there are parents who don't want to be spending nights watching this meeting or going to the meeting or prepping their kids to testify. If they're going to be a stakeholder, if you're telling them they're a stakeholder, treat them as one. Respect them. And the opportunity as 4 months into a new administration, a new Board of Education, is to start addressing the actual process. Because just the way we've always done it shouldn't be, and it just shouldn't be the way it should be going forward. We've seen all the problems with it. You were elected to fix that. So that's what my thoughts on the op-ed. I just know I got some very long, detailed emails on people's experiences with the Board of Ed. And the one thing I want to say is I don't think for a second, as I look at the makeup of this Board of Ed, that we have people who have bad motives by any means. These are people who care. We often fall into this habit of saying, we should do something differently. And somebody says, well, this is the way we do it. This is the way we've always done it. Now is the time to challenge that. And if there's a member who says, this is the way we've always done it, say, I don't care anymore. Go to the full board with the audience there and say, we need a better process for this. One that further respects everybody involved in this issue. And that was the point of that op-ed. And I'm glad I heard so much positive. Stephanie, thanks for bringing attention to this problem. Thought your op-ed was accurate. Thank you, Jeff. I thought this board was going to bring in a new superintendent. Sounds like the same old Hernandez. It will never change. Why even vote? Well, Hernandez has not been extended. So his contract is not every year. They used to give him an extra year. So I'm not sure when it's up. It might be the end of this, probably not this year, maybe next year. I don't know exactly. I can find out. But they're very likely going to let that run out. And that's probably the right thing to do, as opposed to paying him a huge amount of money. Now, sometimes when a superintendent is leaving and doesn't get their way, they can have a tendency to make things difficult. And we are looking out for that as well. So I think if the board has decided to let him finish his contract and not buy him out, and some of these buyouts are huge, 2-3 years of salary, health insurance the rest of their life, those sort of things. If that's what they've decided, I'm all for it. They have not extended him. So they can't talk about that publicly. They can't talk about what the negotiations are, what their thought process are on a contract, on a personnel contract like that. But my gut feeling is that there's not a lot of support for extending him, and letting him finish his contract probably will save the town and taxpayers quite a bit of money. Just something to think about. Okay, it is 4:30, guys. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. We'll be back. My goal is to be back tomorrow. I can't guarantee it because things happen throughout the day, but I'll try to be back on at 4 o'clock. As always, if there are questions or comments or topics you want me to discuss on the shoreline, on Branford, Guilford, East, that kind of stuff, that's fine. Tomorrow I would talk a little bit about Tweed. I know there's a small group of people fighting everything at Tweed, but the benefits of what's happening, 3 new destinations today at Tweed, are spectacular. Would any buyout have to be voted on by the RTM? I believe it would. In fact, that goes back to a previous superintendent we had. What was his name? He ran for office. He became third selectman. We don't have third, but he was on the board of selectmen, but he was superintendent. And he got a buyout. And I think after that, the RTM was like, what the hell? And they now have to go to the RTM for approval of any sort of buyout. But it seems to me, Storm, you're right. Thank you for that. Bruce Storm. He was given a fairly cushy deal, and RTM members were not happy. I think a lot of town was not happy with that deal that he was given. So I think the rules were changed after that it has to go to the RTM for approval. Okay, I'll be back tomorrow. Yes, he did get a sweet deal. And I appreciate everybody joining us today. I will see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Guys, have a great